Come on, do Nazi stuff.
Look out for Charlie.
Let me point out something pretty funny, to me anyway. I used to search Google entrainment all the time, and it used to always say, "Did you mean entertainment?" Like I was mistyping something every time. And it would give me results for entertainment. Just now I searched just for the hell of it, and now it's coming up with 90,200,000 results for entrainment. Pretty interesting. Entrainment. Just a couple weeks ago, I had searched and it said, as usual, "Don't you mean entertainment? Didn't you mean that? Let's check out entertainment instead," right? Pretty funny. But that's what I want to talk about in this video. That is the subject that I want to get into, and I'm going to keep it as street as humanly possible because that's what I like to do. I don't like to get all dry and sciencey. And what I'm going to do is try to explain entrainment to somebody who doesn't understand entrainment at all. For this video, let's use Google's definition of entrainment, and that is entrainment. It's a noun. The process of making something have the same pattern or rhythm as something else. Let's not get into the rest. Let's just keep it there. The process of making something have the same pattern or rhythm as something else. Now, you know when some kid drives by pumping the bass and the shit in your house vibrates? That's kind of a form of entrainment. I used to do this thing back when I was in my late teens, possibly into my early 20s. I used to do this, what I called the one-man band. And I talked about this years ago, but I'm going to talk about it again. Everybody jammed and practiced at my house, music stuff. And I had a lot of equipment there. A lot of equipment. I'm talking amps up the wazoo, PAs, everything, drum sets. So I would plug in these guitars and basses into different amps, many of them, tuning to certain notes. Let's say A, just for example. Let's say A. I would tune all these different strings to A. And then I would set the guitars with the volumes up on them, not touching the strings at all, not playing them, not touching them. I would set one up through different pedals, maybe an overdrive or whatever, let's say 4 or 5 feet from the amp, facing in different directions. Let's say 90 degrees from the amp. Another one was 45 degrees from the amp and 6 feet away. Another one was 8 feet away. All different pedals, different effects on them, but all tuned to A, and I would not play them at all. Then I would plug in this keyboard, and then I would play the A note through, let's say, a bass amp and get a really low drone A note going in the room and play that loud. And that would take about 2 to 5 minutes to really get going. And one by one, each instrument would begin to vibrate in that note. By the time 15-20 minutes went by, all of them were vibrating in that note and kicking out this crazy drone sound that was going on. And then what I would do is I would get behind the drum set and play along to these drone notes. And some of them you could put through tremolo setups or modulators, and that would give you a kind of rhythm, so you could pick the BPM on some of them, and then you could play along with them. I have a recording somewhere of this that I need to dig up because it's very, very interesting. But this, getting them all to vibrate in the same way, is a form of entrainment. That is entrainment. It's not entrainment in the way that biology considers entrainment, but that is a form of entrainment. I have all of these instruments all vibrating in the same pattern, in the same note, in the same frequency as the original master. And the master was the keyboard that I was using. Or you could use a bass guitar or another instrument to direct these, and I had done that before too. There were different ways that you could do this, but that is a form of entrainment. Now, let's get into brainwaves and ELF. Your body, your brain, operates on ELF. Now, when nature was designed, created, whatever you want to call it, it was never considered that animals or people would be tapping into ELF frequencies, but we are. And our lungs, our bodies are all controlled by ELF signals and cranial nerves and electricity, basically. A form of entrainment would be to send a signal to somebody, to their brain or to their body, repeatedly or for a long time, and let's say affect their heart. You could get somebody's heart to begin beating to this entrainment because the brain locks onto ELF. It is designed to lock onto ELF. This is a scientific fact. It just does. There are many studies that I have, and there's one very interesting one from 1990 that talks about doing ELF experiments and the brain locking on to these ELF signals immediately. Like once it senses them, it locks on. Now that makes entrainment very, very easy for someone who is trying to entrain somebody. Now, you can do more than just entrain brain waves, you can entrain breathing. Because what controls breathing? It is the diaphragm. And the brain being entrained, you could change somebody's breathing during sleep to a certain beat, a certain BPM. Now, here's the trick to all of this. The more somebody is around this entrainment, whether that be brainwave, breathing, heart, whatever, the more their natural ability to control that is going to weaken. Now think about that. The more you have an artificial entrainment signal directing brainwaves, the heart, breathing, the more that happens, the weaker the actual natural impulse is going to be because it doesn't need to be there. Now, if you really begin to think about that, that is where things get really scary. We have a new wave of death happening. They're in boardrooms coming up with sudden adult death syndrome and sudden kid death syndrome and whatever. But before that, we began to have a wave of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, right? And what is that? Well, that could be a form of apnea. Now, lots of people have apnea. Why does apnea exist? We don't know. Did apnea exist before? No, not the way it exists now. All of these new illnesses and conditions, whether they be physical, mental, all of them have been worsening and worsening since the late 60s. Isn't that weird? Now, I'm going to veer off course for a minute. If you listen to Dave McGowan's information, or get into Dave McGowan's books, he's got a book called Program to Kill, right? Dave McGowan is really awesome, by the way, or was really awesome, because he's just a dude that studies his shit. Kept his sense of humor, and I liked the guy very much. But in that book, he talks about the fact, and it is a fact, that modern serial killers didn't exist the way we know them now until the late 60s or early 70s. Now, isn't that weird? That's around the same time that people also began to have voice of God weapons problems, like hearing voices. Let's consider Herbert Mullen that heard the voice of God telling him that he had to kill people to stop a catastrophic earthquake and save people, right? And in the same city, a mechanic named John Linley Frazier began to hear voices within like the same year. He began to hear the voice of God telling him to kill people that were hurting the earth. It's very strange that all of these modern illnesses and modern sicknesses and these modern conditions have all been progressing and evolving and changing since the late 60s. Some of them didn't even exist before, but this apnea thing and sudden infant death syndrome has really picked up. And I personally know of a handful of babies that have died of this exact thing. One right on my block, others to people that I know. So it's a very real thing that is affecting people, and no one can figure it out. What's going on? Well, let's consider apnea. And with apnea, let's consider entrainment. What are babies? Babies are very weak. As strong as they are, they can bounce. People drop them and they bounce. Their muscles are not strong yet. They're weak. They're getting the hang of everything, breathing, doing these things. Things are not developed yet, right? And adults, they've been breathing for years, something that you don't even take into consideration. They are very strong at doing this. Their brains are very strong at doing this. It happens without them even realizing it. A baby is getting used to all this. Now, an entrainment signal that would affect an adult in very minimal ways could have a big effect on a baby, a huge detrimental effect on a baby. Now, let's just say that an ELF signal, an entrainment signal, was put out. And for those who don't know, you cannot stop ELF. Trying to stop ELF is like putting tissue paper in front of a semi. It goes and it goes and it goes. It's a very low signal, infrasound. And the Earth puts this out naturally. But let's say that an entrainment signal was put out for, we'll say, 3 weeks, okay, in an area while this baby sleeps. It is entraining the baby's breathing. And then pretty soon, the baby is breathing to the pattern of the entrainment signal, not the original breathing pattern that it had. This could be heartbeat, this could be breathing, this can be brainwave. Cell phones do this to brainwaves, and that's a fact. I mean, that's like mainstream factual, and it takes hours for people's brainwaves to go back to normal after a simple phone call. Having that phone up to your head, your brainwaves are disrupted. So this baby has been being entrained in its breathing for 3 weeks. All you have to do is simply shut the signal off. So let's say this signal is just out there and a baby is within that signal's radius, right? Within its reach. And it has become entrained to the signal, and suddenly it just shuts off. The entrainment signal is gone. What is going to happen here? Well, the baby is new, it's weak, it hasn't developed yet all these things. And since it is new and it's been relying on this entrainment signal for these things, those natural impulses have become weaker. So when the signal goes off, the baby will stop breathing. When the baby stops breathing, its natural instinct and ability to breathe cannot come back in time, and it dies. It's a very scary and interesting topic to consider. That's a form of entrainment, and shutting off the entrainment will totally fuck somebody up. It's the same idea as a pacemaker. What is a pacemaker? A pacemaker is a great way to hide what it really is with the name. It's an entrainment machine. And what this does is electronically entrain your heart to a certain rhythm. And certain magnetic charges, certain signals can totally disrupt pacemakers, and you'll have somebody's heart flipping out when they are unable to get that pacemaker signal, that entrainment signal. Their hearts will totally freak out, and people will die. But the human body does not need an electronic device to do this. It's totally unnecessary, because the human body, the human brain, locks on to ELF, and that's how it works. Let's consider witnesses. I won't get too far into it, but there have been witnesses of certain things, have spoke about certain things, and then those certain people have gone to sleep one night and were dead the next, and they were completely healthy people. Now that's very strange. No sign of death, they just stopped breathing. A very puzzling thing for coroners out there, but they're pretty much told what to write in now anyway. They're owned and operated But anyway, it would be very easy for somebody to have something happen in their sleep like this. That's a very, very powerful weapon to have. A very powerful weapon to have. And let's face it, everything in history has been weaponized first and then turned into something for the people. I mean, everything. Everything from flight to the internet was military first and for people second. They figured out a way for the people to use it. And when it is handed over to the people, it's usually for surveillance purposes, for making money, or some other thing. You know, the internet is, for the most part, all nefarious. It really is. You know, cell phones, people think that's a great convenience to have, and it's a great convenience for surveillance. And that's what's going on with this technology. They are figuring out ways for people to use it after it has been weaponized for decades and decades. But I truly believe that SIDS and this kind of shit is the result of entrainment signals and the body reacting to these entrainment signals. And all you have to do, like I said, is take away that signal. Take away the signal, and the body has to remember how to do this, especially with a weak body. And then you have a lot of dead babies, and that's a very scary thing to think about. Music is a form of entrainment. Okay, it's pop entrainment. It's milk toast entrainment, but it is entrainment. And the bad thing to music, and this is coming from somebody who played music their entire life, the bad thing about music is that you sort of remember these beats always. And this can be weaponized as well. I won't get into that in this video, but just that alone, remembering beats and rhythms, especially 4/4 stuff, is definitely, it's dangerous. It really is dangerous. And I would have never said that. Even 15 years ago, I would have questioned that, but it's true. But music is a form of entrainment. Entrainment is everywhere. But understanding what entrainment does, what it is, how it works, and what it can really do is important, because, you know, we have all these mysterious illnesses now and conditions that didn't happen before. For the good of the people, they have figured out how to create these pacemakers for people, entrainment machines for people's hearts. Now, when you consider the history, you have to know, if you're not stupid or naive, that this has all been weaponized in some form or another, and all of this is wireless now. There is not a bit of this that is not wireless. They still put out propaganda showing Dr. Persinger's God helmet hooked up to wires. You know, it creates the illusion that that's where we're still at. We're nowhere near this. You know, Jose Delgado did all of this stuff back in the late 60s. We're nowhere near the wired age that they want you to believe we are. And entrainment is a very, very real thing. There are certain things you can do in your sleep before you are actually sleeping, lying in bed. You can do certain things to try to understand entrainment. As many people, I've heard many stories from people where they sort of wake up out of a sleep and can feel something happening to their breathing. They may feel like something is breathing underneath them, or like their bed is breathing almost. But as soon as they move, open their eyes, or do whatever, it will stop. But if you can lie there for long enough and just experience it and pay attention to it, you can feel it consciously until you move. And it's almost as if the system then knows you're awake and it stops. It's very strange, but people have talked about that. And I've had many discussions with people, and that falls back in line with what I was talking about with the SIDS. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, and if you think this is wild, go watch the video called MIT Brags About Surveillance, or the surveillance system. I will link to that in the pinned comment. And that is a video I did about MIT basically backing up everything that I've ever talked about on this channel. So ELF is a vast signal, and our bodies operate off it. Now, one large broadcast of ELF can travel a long, long way. You could have masses of people at night breathing to the same pattern, thinking in the same pattern, and getting their hearts to beat in the same pattern. And if you think they haven't experimented with stuff like this, you're high. You are high off your ass. But the whole SIDS thing, I'm convinced now that that is a product of ELF and entrainment on the baby, and that is a lesson in entrainment there. It becomes entrained, the signal stops or pauses just long enough, and the body can't remember quick enough how to do it, and the baby dies. And they'll say it's for science, right? That's how they talk. Didn't want to do it, but it's for the science. So we did it to these poor people over here, or these middle class people over here. And that is entrainment. Just like the one-man band I had back when I was an experimental kid. And that's it for now. Look out for Charlie.
I don't like the world now. I mean, before I always knew I was a son of a bitch. But now I'm the only son of a bitch I know. Hey, make way for a real human being. Get out of the way, yeah.
Look out for Charlie.
I want that son of a bitch dead. I want him dead.